Amrita?
Bhakti.
Amrita, are women in sports still marginalized?
No way. Not in Bollywood, they aren't.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. There's been a lot of patriotic films about women athletes in the past years, not just in India and Bollywood, but also, as you know, in Hollywood as well. So, I think the question we're trying to discuss today is, do women in sports matter, or are they just symbols to be hyped up and then turned into some sort of an inspiring movie? Are women still being marginalized? And we're going to be joined later by Sohini Chattopadhyay, who just wrote a book, which is a kind of history of women runners, right?
Right. I'm really looking forward to that. The Day I Became a Runner is her book.
Yep.
But let's talk about this question that we have posed, right? Do women in sports really matter, or are they marginalized? I mean, here we are talking about the sports industry overall. We are talking about big business, the revenues, the advertising, the federations, and everything is intertwined in a way that automatically has these structures of whether women are seen, they have access, and then, the larger question whether girls and women are discouraged from pursuing athletics and sports.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, there are two threads to this. There's the profession in which women get marginalized. It's a masculine profession. I mean, if anything, we are I think just last year we saw the big World Cup. Well, last year, like this summer, essentially,
Yes.
we saw the Women's World Cup, and it was a big deal because it had all this World Cup in soccer, football,
Yes.
and it was a huge deal because it was almost streamed to us as if it was the sports representation that we're used to, big ads, all these kind of lineup of commentators, the star athletes, learning about their profiles, being written about, just really giving them this desired space. And it was such a unique event, and we're talking about 2023. This is how long it has taken us to get there. And then the other thread I think you're bringing in, and I think Sohini's book does this a little bit as well, is just kind of the practice of daily sports, whether it's running or playing cricket on the streets or volleyball at school or whatever. That also seems to be, at least within South Asia, and I would say in the West as well, quite problematic. I think there's still a sense that pursuing athletic dreams is not necessarily encouraged, right? I don't know. Would you think that's something?
No, you're absolutely right, because I'm thinking it's not just a South Asia thing or a problem, and it's much more wider in the West too. As you know, incidentally, part of my family is in Sweden, and they pride themselves on gender equality, and women in sports are ranked very high in the world. And yet, I was speaking just because you mentioned the World Cup soccer, and women's team is really highly ranked, better than men. And I was speaking with somebody, and they said in Sweden that, it's all about the revenues. It's all about where the money is. And people want to watch men's soccer because that's what's getting all the big
ads.
Yes. And then, inadvertently, men's soccer team in Sweden is much less ranked than the women's team. So it's, it doesn't make sense. Why there would be I mean, we are also here talking about spectatorship, right? What people want to watch. And automatically it is assumed that it is the men's cricket, the men's soccer, football. So, it's a very interesting kind of juxtaposition that we're looking at also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, talking about this, you can't get away from those basic conversations about sexism and objectification of women's bodies and the focus on women's body. I mean, when I was growing up in India, do you even remember like those cricket players all being fit and stuff? I mean, they were not even, but like when, and now I think, of course, there's more fitness oriented, or the look, because they also have to sell products and stuff like that. It's changing.
Yeah.
But the truth is, women never escape this particular trap, right?
Not at
I
all.
mean, I was so scandalized because I think, I don't know where this, like, volleyball was playing, and just like the stuff they wear, and then there's
Mm.
this whole kind of culture of watching women's wrestling because they wear these really tiny underwear. It's just like
Mm.
there is such a puerile, disgusting, objectifying component to it. I'm not saying we don't objectify men, but it's definitely not in the same way.
No,
And
not
then
at
the other focus on the women's body is also like the tests, Semenya Castor, if you think about Duti Chand had to undergo similar kinds of scandals as well, or
Yeah.
whatever, this testing, and then the scandals that come out of it to
Yeah.
prove, are you woman or are you man? I mean, it's awful, the focus on the physical in a way that's even more than it would be in a very physical industry.
Right. And I'm also thinking, looking back at the 90s when we had within the tennis world, and tennis world already we know appearance has a key thing about how women tennis players look, with Monica Seles, Steffi Graf, and later on with Maria Sharapova. And I remember, do you remember that the stabbing incident that happened with Seles coming back after years, and she had gained some weight and she was playing fantastically still then, but the conversation was not about what she was doing, but rather how she was looking and when she was going to lose that extra weight or so.
Yeah.
And it was so problematic. And then we have the 2000s with that whole, how women in tennis look. And then you mentioned the hyperandrogenism. I think we should unpack it, that, now women have to prove that they're women enough to be in the sports.
No, it's
And there
ridiculous.
is no, it seems like the binary of what the sports has determined to be male and female, and scientifically it's not even that much of a binary. It's so blurred.
I know, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And I would, of course, throw that in because we're talking about tennis. It's like the stuff that Serena Williams endures,
Oh my goodness.
the anti blackness, the kind of disgusting racism around how she looks. And she's been incredible and empowered, but she's not this kind of dainty, hot thing or whatever that you're supposed to be, while also playing the power game that
Yes.
she has delivered year after year after year. So,
I also remember, she has done this really powerful campaign with Nike called Dream Crazier. I don't know if you've seen it. And she
Mhm.
actually takes up on all of these issues about how there are certain kinds of stereotypes associated with how to look, cliches of appearance, and how to behave on the court, temperaments, and, how unfair treatments are usually for the women. And we have a history of glorifying McEnroe and how cool it was to be angry on the court, right?
God, I know, I forgot about that. Yeah, absolutely. And then wasn't Serena Williams reprimanded
Yes,
for? Okay,
fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
she
on
was
court
fined. That's
for
right.
yes,
Oh
yes.
God, it's awful. But I think Sohini is going to focus more on India. I think her book focuses on Indian women. And we've had this kind of crazy year last year. And I know you were really upset about what was happening with PT Usha.
Yes.
So, I mean, don't you think this kind of a big year should change our perception, or is it just making things worse? I mean, we'll ask Sohini, but what do you think?
Well, Bhakti, you started with a really important statement about all of these films coming out, right? That glorify there's something, and one would feel that something has shifted. We have these representations in film about women in sports women in India, and yet you mentioned 2023. It's such a sad year to think about. First of all, we have Vidusha coming and literally pleading, breaking down in public, and saying there is a problem with safety. The PT Usha Academy that she heads, um, she has been demanding safety, and she's been talking about encroachment and hooliganism, problematic behaviors, and she's been asking to build a wall, and it goes unheard of. And then with the entire controversy happening in wrestling, with Vinesh Fogart and Sakshi Malik, really important women wrestlers who have been protesting against the federation chief on the account of sexual harassment and allegations,
Yeah.
and demanding their arrest. And they have even tried to throw their medals in the river as a mark of protest. Uh,
Wonderful.
yeah, but they have been detained. Sakshi Malik was earlier detained by authorities for the protest, and I believe late into 2023 she quit,
Yeah.
with the new appointment of the federation, um, who's
Mhm.
backed by the previous with the predecessor. So all of this really makes me wonder if there is a shift, and where are we going from where this
Right.
mistreatment, lack of safety, the problem of representation still
Mhm.
really tainting the world of women's sports.
No, absolutely. And I know that we are making it seem as if these films are just so amazing or something, but I mean, it is such a meager selection at the end of the day, and within that also, so many problems. I mean, of course, for a long time, the film that was like the big film about women in sports was like starring Shah Rukh Khan, and it was Chak
Yes.
De. And it's a super entertaining film, super moving. I'm right in there, I'm crying and want them to win and whatever, all of that. I'm right there for all of them. But hello, I mean, is it who is it about?
Yes,
It's about this
absolutely.
guy.
It's the
And
heroism about, this male protagonist,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And a lot of the times, and a year ago I taught a course on gender and cinema, and we did a whole module on sports films. And one of the things we learned again and again as a class together was, men's films about sports can track a certain journey, but women's films about sports have to track that journey and also show overcoming very basic obstacles. And those basic obstacles are family,
Yeah.
family spaces. There's either the dad or the mom who are just like, absolutely not, she must not be like this. You remember like Bend It Like Beckham, which was such a so fun, iconic, absolutely brilliant film,
Mm,
where she's trying to overcome this conservative family who wants her to get married, and then the other girl at the time, played by Keira Knightley, her mom is worried she's gay. Sports will make you gay.
yeah.
So it's just, so these films too. It's a small selection, and already even within that, it's so troubled. Am I happy they exist? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're really working with crumbs here. I just wanted to kind of
No,
engage that.
no, I 100% agree with you. And what you're saying also, I'm thinking about the pressure of success, right? I mean, all of these women who we hear about, it has to be these extreme blazing success or nothing, right? We don't have regular uh, sort of women practicing sports. It
Right.
has to be really women bringing laurels to the country in a way that makes us remember that there is women's sports out there. And
Yeah,
that's so problematic in so many different ways.
I know. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, I have to kind of confess that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it for myself, just because I've never had that aspiration, or whatever. But I think, I hope Sohini is able to kind of touch upon the challenges, like basic challenges for like girls, to go out there and do something. Or I think her book looks a lot at spaces and things like that.
Right, right. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping to get some kind of a hopeful shift in terms of where we are going may not be so miserable and
Yeah.
so
we have a
sad.
lot of we have a lot of expectations from her, so I see her now coming in. So let's welcome her and bombard her with 1,000 questions.
Absolutely.
Oh, Sohini is here. Welcome. Sohini Chattopadhyay is joining us today. And I think you're going to have to resolve some of the debates and discussions Amrita and I have been passionately having seconds before you came. So the topic we are, thinking about is, are women in sports still being marginalized? Because the truth of the matter is, there's been so many films about women in sports in recent years. And as you know, the last year, sportswomen with their debacle with wrestling and so many different things, like they have been foregrounded. The fact women athletes, women in sports have been foregrounded. And I was also, I know you've written a fantastic book and we'll get to it in a minute, but you've also been a film critic. That's how I've come to know your work. And I just, we wanted to start, Amrita and I are huge fans of films, and we end up talking about films more than we should in our podcast. And there have been so many films about sports recently, like Shabash Mittu. There's of course Dangal, Dil Bole Hadippa, well, Mary Com. There's been a lot. And then before that was of course Chak De and Dangal. There was that whole round too. What do you think this trend is saying about women in sports today?
Yeah, so I think the women in sports moment was very big until about in Hindi cinema until I think about 3 years ago. So and now not so much, but there certainly was, like, beginning with some of the films you named, Chakte, etc. The way I read it is that these are statements of citizenship. Sport is anyway always associated with nationalism. And I've actually written an essay about this as well, is that in the last 15 years or maybe 20 years, there is this recasting of the Indian woman as the ideal citizen through the figure of the sportswoman. And before that, so my argument was, I wrote this for a magazine, for a journal called Seminar, that from early Hindi cinema till about the 90s, every major leading woman would play a courtesan or a tawayaf or a prostitute or some sort of performer. And now every major leading woman and leading man actually will play a sports person. Everyone. I can't think of a single major actor who hasn't done it. So I feel like this is like a recasting of the ideal Indian woman, and of course the ideal Indian man. But the figure of the courtesan / performer / tawayaf / actor, whatever, the performing woman was seen as pre-modern India. She was often a good person, but she was invariably a tragic person, even if sometimes, the things that you saw in these films were actually very wonderful, luxurious things. So, for instance, Pakiza, you see Meena Kumari's hair being perfumed with these wonderful old-fashioned lamps. And you look at that and you think, I want that life. But she's a tragic figure. She's not a happy, she's not going to get a happy ending, because I think that was the idea that the national movement portrayed, the idea of the Bhadra Mahila, and the cultured, educated woman who would be a good, mother and a good wife and a good citizen in that sense. But now we see her being recast as the sportswoman. Or the other trope is also a physical trope. Actually, you also see a lot of women as spies or national agents. Or
it's true, yeah.
It's so Tapsi Pannu actually does both. It's a casting of, this is what the modern Indian good citizen is. She is.
Sohini, I'll quickly jump in there. I'm fascinated that you're saying that this trend has been happening the last, 3 years ago, and now there's this recasting. But I'm thinking of, Bhakti and I were chatting about 2023 specifically. And it's so much has happened in terms of sport and Indian women. And I'm thinking about the controversy where P.T. Usha broke down in public, saying the state, there's encroachment and hooliganism in the academy that she heads. And of course, then we have the entire year filled with the wrestling controversy. And it's heartbreaking It has only gotten worse, we see. So how does this recasting really match up? Where do we go from here?
It's really depressing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is really heartbreaking because I don't know if you followed the entire protests. They began in January last year,
Yes. Yes.
and in the beginning, actually, these wrestlers were saying that. So they weren't saying that this happened to us. They were saying that this has happened to someone I know, to my
Yes.
friend. And so that is also one reason why the FIRs were not being lodged, because nobody was saying that this happened to me. So, very early on in my book, I realized that this is a subject that I would not be able to touch, because if I went into this subject, it was clear that it was everywhere. It's not just wrestling. And in a way, we also know this, right? It's not just sport, it's everywhere. Like we saw with the Me Too movement some years ago, it is everywhere. It's certainly there. And but what I feel is that sport in India is a cage, just like academia is. So I thought of it like Losha, the list of sexual harassers in academia, which had when Raya Sarkar had brought that up, because nobody was saying, or it was anonymous, and it had to be anonymous because they have the power to shut. You're imprisoned by the system. That is how the sports bureaucracy is in India. No matter how good you are, you may have just won a world championship, but you're not going to unless you get a signature on your form, you're not going to go to the next tournament. Which is why nobody was saying that this happened to me. I think it's very, very sad. I wish I could be more optimistic about it, but I cannot think of anybody who is thinking that I'll let my daughter go into sport. My entire book is about, in a way, suggesting that maybe sport may be a more viable ladder of social mobility than education, higher education has been. But I now think, in that sense, I may have failed, because I can't think of anybody who would say, I want my daughter to, get into sport, because that is a route to a grade 4 government job, which it is. I think it's really terrible, and it's just ended in such a horrible way. The other thing I wanted to say was that, I don't know if you remember, but I think Vinesh and Sakshi Malik, the Olympian, said that, imagine if this is happening to Olympians, then what is it like to be, an average, an arm citizen? So I mean, it's so true, right? There's really not even no hope, I feel. If this, and what were they asking for? They were not asking for this particular MP to be removed from parliament, or they were only saying, please don't have this person as the wrestling federation chief. It was such a small ask. It is such a small ask.
Yeah. So you are almost suggesting that this year, this horrible year, where you're kind of weaving in the Me Too and how Me Too unfolded, and this kind of world of sports into one. You're saying it's almost was to the detriment. And I know that the outcome right now looks really bad, but sometimes one always thinks that somebody takes the fall for it, but then it paves the path for better discourses, better approaches, better something, right? Because this is what you can even kind of intersect it with international women athletes, when Serena Williams or Naomi Osaka or like Simone Biles are talking about mental health or problems with coaches and all these kind of same issues, they are chastised, gossiped about, hated, all that happens. But there is a sense that it opens up something for the next level. But you feel pessimistic that the key problems still haven't come to the fore.
I do, I was a running group had invited me some weeks ago to talk about my book, and this came up there because the wrestlers' protest has been foremost on people's minds, everybody's minds, especially when it comes to a sports book. And somebody from the audience, a young man from the audience, was saying exactly what you were saying, Bhakti, that that on the whole, this is a good thing because at least people are talking about it. And I was saying that, but there have been so many instances when a correction could have been made. And it's such a small ask. The original ask is still so small. And it's still taken so much that I really wonder what it must feel like to be, to be Sakshi Malik, or to be her sister, or to be her mother. There's a very interesting film called Dear Comrade, which I wrote about some time ago. And it was almost, it came right after the summer of Me Too in India. So Me Too in India happened in 2018, and this came in the summer of 2019. And in fact, Me Too happened at the end of 2018, right? So it felt like a prophetic film. And it looked like the trailer for the film was, it looked like a youthful romance. And in fact, it starred Vijay Deverakonda, who's like the poster boy of the toxic man, and Rashmika Mandana. But it was a story about sexual harassment in sport. And it was about how the man helped her, but she helped herself, but he found his sense of maturity by helping her do the right thing. And it was very, very similar, actually, because for years, this young woman cricketer who had undergone sexual harassment didn't speak about it. She gave up the game. She was depressed. She tried to kill herself. So the reckoning happened years after her playing days. I think that's a very high cost to pay. No, I'm just thinking that if you're
it's a terrible cost to pay, especially when we bring it back to the context of India, where you're not raking it in the way Serena Williams is, or Osaka is. You know what I mean? So already there's so much marginalization. There's bad revenues or ad campaigns, all that kind of stuff that you associate with the profit of sports is already missing. And then on top of it, you add this madness, and because we were researching this episode, Amrita and I ended up in the trap of Googling Sania Mirza, and literally no one would even know she plays anything. All you know is stuff about her divorce and rumors about the divorce and her marriage and
motherhood, how she's as a mother.
Exactly. It's like there is nothing that even, we don't even know if she's a sportswoman. But listen, we don't want to belabor the thing that congratulations on your absolutely fantastic book. Thank you so much for giving us advance copies to read. The day I become a runner, we ask all our listeners to run out and buy it. And I think I want you to tell everybody what this book is about. But before you say that, I just want to add that it does this kind of really important work of fusing two things. One is the personal story of trying to run on the streets of this crazy country, and in urban spaces even, and then you go out and you try running in various other countries and places, and just speak about space and for women who want to try this, want to be athletic, want to engage in sports. And then it's also a history of women athletes, especially runners. So it does this kind of personal and historical work, and it's fantastic, and congratulations. But now you tell us what this book is about, what inspired it.
So it is a book on gender. It is a book on sport, but primarily I see it as a book on citizenship. And this line running through the middle says, a women's history of India through the lens of sport. Why a women's history of India, and why through the lens of sport? Because I think sports gives you the legitimacy to cross the threshold from the private sphere, from the domestic sphere into the public sphere. So women's citizenship in the private sphere at home is unquestioned. We are revered as mothers and wives. But the moment we step out into the world, our status as equal citizens is a lot less certain. I mean, we know this instinctively. I call this the Lakshman Rekha of citizenship. And sports gives you the legitimacy to cross this Lakshman Rekha. Why? Because you're seen as performing for the nation. You're seen as performing nationalism. So this is a three-tiered idea. The first is that sports and nationalism are inextricably related. So we see that the high noon of nationalism is the turn of the 20th century, which is also the time that organized sport begins to take off in a big way. So some dates: 1896, the first edition of the modern Olympics; 1904, FIFA, which is the World Football Association, is set up. Around 1911 or 12, the International Tennis Association puts its rules together. Sometime a little bit before that, sometime in the 1870s, the first international test match is played between Australia and England. So as momentum is gathering for World War I, we see nations even before that lining up on the sports field. So, and the other twin of sport and nationalism is actually cinema. So 1895, again, quizzers may know this, is the premiere of the Lumiere brothers' Arrival of a Train in Paris. And there is a little bit of cinema in the book, but both sport and cinema are huge platforms for nationalism. They're all turn of the 20th century twins. So that's the first tier of the argument. The second is that men can go to war. Women largely don't, even if some combat roles are opened up for women. So how do women perform nationalism? Historically, we see that the suffragist movement, very prominent in the US and the UK in particular, they make major gains in 1918 and 1919. Why? Because that's the end of World War I. And these women were seen as having done their duty while the men were, at the war front, in the trenches. So citizenship. So, and the third tier is that sports allows women to perform nationalism at times of, at times when you're not in war. So that is what the book is about. I'm telling the story of, the Republic, you could say, but India from the 1930s to the current moment through the lives of 9 women athletes, and myself, who's not, I'm very much a hobby runner. I'm looking only at running because I think of it as a minimal sport. You don't need anything. You don't need to train. You don't need equipment. Until about 5 years ago, you didn't even need to wear shoes. Now the Athletics Federation of India has changed that.
You just have to donate your kneecaps to the cause. Eventually you don't have that left. I'm just kidding. Go on.
Yeah. So that's what. So I begin in the 1940s with Mary D'Souza, who was part of the first Indian Olympic contingent to send women to the Olympics at the 1952 Games. Then there's Kamaljit Sandhu, who's the first Indian woman to win an individual gold outside India, 1970. Very, very significant win for India because the news in India is very glum at the time. So the Naxals. So if you look at the front pages, Naxals are murdering bank managers, giving vice chancellors of university a very hard time. There is an Air India strike. Cotton growers are very upset with the government because there is a limit. This is the time of the license Raj. So there's a limit on how much cotton they can access. So it's a very glum time, and then Kamaljit wins, and she actually defeats an Olympic medalist, a Taiwanese athlete called Chi Cheng. Then I come to the 1980s with PT Usha, iconic sportswoman. Sure. The second, so the book is broadly in 3 sections. The first third is about, you could say, pioneers. I travel from the 1940s to the 1980s. The next section is about 3 athletes who are called out for not being women enough broadly. So sport is, I think, the domain in contemporary life which polices the distinction between male and female the most, because you only play in two categories. There is no third category. So sports has a very long and unsettling history of sex tests, gender test. I think the term gender test is wrong. Sex test is a more accurate way to say it. So Shanti Soundarajan, the first athlete to be called out in the world after the era of compulsory sex testing is over. So 1999, compulsory sex testing is over. After 1999, you are only called out if someone complains. You're only tested if someone complains against you. So it's the first athlete ever. She wins in Doha, Asian Games medal, and then she's stripped of the medal. She wins a silver in 800 meters, one of the best middle distance runners we have. Wow. Then we have Pinky Pramanik, who's not called out on the field, but who's accused by her housemate of rape, but it casts questions about her athletic career. And then we have Dutee Chand. And so we travel actually a very short period. We travel from 2006 to 2015, less than a decade in this section. But it was important for me to tell all the three stories because Shanti is dumped by the government of India like a defective toy. Pinky wins her case in the Calcutta High Court. And for Dutee Chand, the government of India goes to the Court of Arbitration in Sport, which is the Supreme Court of Sport, and Dutee wins.
Right.
So very briefly, yeah.
We've been exactly talking about the whole sex test and the hyper-androgenism that is going on and the terrible fates that these elite athletes are going through, the women athletes are going through. And I personally loved how you took these stories of 8 women and you're showcasing a certain trajectory within Indian women's sports. But I'm also thinking about the beginning of the book, which really hit me. And you're talking about spaces. You mentioned citizenship and the performance of citizenship and how sports enables that. But I was struck by the stories you talk about the fear of acid attacks on women when they're running. And you have this moment when you're thinking about that yourself. And then the clothing women choose to wear while they're running. You talk about the sweat and what that can do visibly. And it's very beautifully written. Again, shout out for really terrific writing.
Thank you.
But would you say that beyond the running and the sports, and of course this is about claiming citizenship, but this is also about claiming women's bodies visibly in public spaces, resisting patriarchy in so many different kinds of ways?
Of course. Yeah. So one of the triggers for the book was that one of course was the murder and gang rape of the 23-year-old paramedical student who went to watch Life of Pi at a Delhi multiplex. I don't like the media given name for her at all, so I like to call her by her name, Jyoti. So one was that, of course, but one was, far less serious. I was walking back home after covering an election, a Padyatra by Mamata Banerjee. And her Padyatras are actually like, she really walks fast. They're like sprint yatras. I was walking back home, absolutely killer April afternoon in Kolkata. I stepped out of the metro and I have an umbrella. And somebody taps me on the back. And when I look back, this man tells me, close your umbrella, you're taking up the space of 3 people. And I remember telling him, because this is central Calcutta, Moidan. So I remember pointing out the parked cars on both sides of the road, the hawkers, and telling him, why don't you tell them to move? And I remember him, I think he said, oh, they are not disturbing anybody, or they're doing their work, or they're something like that. Meaning I was taking up more space and not enabling work. But these people, a parked car had more right to public space than I did. And, at the time, I think I had just done 2 or 3 chapters. I wasn't sure whether the book was going anywhere. But I remember, I'm very grateful to this man who articulated it so clearly that you're taking up space and you're not useful. So I thought that this is something I have to, because for me, citizenship is also about claiming space. That's why I make the point about the Lakshman Rekha, about the threshold between the domestic sphere and the public. If you look at some of the debates around women's citizenship, there's this book which nearly everybody's read, Geraldine Forbes' Women of Colonial India. Then there's a very good book on citizenship called Citizenship and Its Discontents by Nija Gopal-Jayal. So these questions of, so Sarojini Naidu, for instance, said that Indian women should get the vote because they would be good mothers and good wives, not because they would interfere with men in the whole. It was framed as good mothers and good enablers of the next generation of citizens. But they don't interfere with. So there was this very clear demarcation between the sphere of duty and the sphere of rights. Very much like that's why I think the Lakshman Rekha is a perfect way to describe, very similar to what Lakshman had done, that you are good as long as you stay within this circumference. And then when you step out, anything can happen.
Right.
So these are debates that happened.
So, but I'm also thinking, you say, in the book that, it is, of course, difficult to run in India in public spaces, but you do kind of give a tribute to Calcutta more than other spaces, right?
I wouldn't today. Today I wouldn't. I think Bangalore maybe.
That was very interesting to me. But, I was also very surprised and sad because one film that meant something to me more than many other sports films is Shabash Mittu. And you talk about that at the end of your book, where I was surprised that the figure of Noori is actually based on Nushin Al-Qadir, very prominent Muslim woman, Indian woman cricketer, to one of the very few to have had 100 one-day international crickets. And yet her role is completely butchered and erased. And, whereas her father in real life had actually given the space to her and, urged her to join cricket. In the film, of course, it is another representational huge problem where, again, it's the regressive Muslim family where the girl has to lie to pursue her dreams. So, tell us more about how you feel there's this kind of erasure within the erasure that we're talking about.
In cinema, you mean? In popular culture?
I would ask in both. I would ask.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the way they're intertwined.
I think popular culture, at least Hindi cinema, has this trope of needing to save Muslim women.
Yeah.
That I have written about also. That repeatedly you will see that Muslim women need to be, either they are misguided, they are going to blow themselves up because they have been witness to pogroms. So the solution is that so either they are brainwashed or they are damsels in distress. They need to be saved.
So I'm just going to say that I think what Amrita and I agree is that it allowed us that erasure that you point out in the film, which I did not know about, nor did Amrita. It makes me, what it did was it kind of makes us realize the gaps. And forget about films. It just makes you think, oh God, it's already so bad for women out there in the profession of sports. It must be so much harder if that person is Muslim, right? So I think that's what it points to. But I wanna ask you get your last word today.
Can I add one more thing to that? So Shabash Mittu is a distortion, and it is a distortion, and Nosheen is actually associated with the film in that she trained Tapsi Pannu, the star to bat.
Yes.
So she is in real life Mithali Raj's best friend. And the real reason for the erasure is probably something as banal as they don't have the permission to make Nosheen's film, but there will be another film or there will be a series and that will explore the Muslim. So, but they fall into the trope of the Muslim woman who needs to be saved, which is what I was pointing to. But the other thing I try to say in the book, because there is an absence of Muslim women in sport that I grappled with.
Sure.
And my thought was that you see so many Muslim women in cinema, at least in early cinema. They're pioneers in a way that, you know, when you look at early Bombay or early Calcutta cinema, you actually see Jews and Parsis and Anglo-Indians and Muslims. You don't see the Hindu woman at all until with the exception of a Devika Rani, absolute exceptions. So my sense is that there was a shaming of the woman in public, especially the Muslim woman, especially the Tawayaf / performer, because many of those who performed in early Indian cinema were from performing cultures, because early technology was such that you needed to be either a good singer, preferably somebody comfortable, because you don't have too much film stock, etc. So I think there was a shaming. And then I also think that it's difficult to survive, let alone play competitive sport, when you're living in ghettos with such bad facilities, which is what the Sachar Committee report says.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Before we run out of time, I just wanted to ask you to have a final word on, if I ask you to pick just 2 things that need to shift for the profession, for women in the profession of sports. This is not about films, not about representation, not about anything. Just specifically, I think we are asked the question, are women in sports still being marginalized? And I think we don't have a debate question here. It's simply absolutely yes. So then I want you to give me a sort of two quick solutions.
So, Bhakti, I'm going to give a boring answer. Actually, I think, look at Bajrang Punia also with the wrestlers. Sports in India needs to be professionally managed. It cannot be done in this way that even men are. I know that it sounds a bit wishy-washy, like all lives matter. I know that I'm saying that. But unless you are a cricketer or, something very high profile today, maybe badminton. Badminton actually, I think, is quite professionally managed. But unless you're a prominent sports person, even if you're very good, you're subject to these kind of feudal management, if one can call it management. So you still need that signature on your form. You may be a champion, but you still need that signature on your form to get to go to the next tournament. So I think sports needs to be put in professional hands. And like everything else in India, actually nobody enforces posh rules or any of that, least of all the media. Media organizations will 100% not have posh rules in place.
Yeah. Thank you, Sohini. Amrita, you had some final comment or?
No, I was just thinking, for me, the book spoke so much about what has happened and what, as you said, that the shift needs to be to take sports seriously in a different way, but also just, for women in sports to have certain kinds of access from school. I mean, I think it should begin much earlier than, suddenly going to a certain elite sports and finding all of these loops and flaws that are there. So I don't know whether within schools also we have that kind of sort of potential that is tapped into.
We don't have public spaces for sport in India. No, one of the ironic things that I noticed in my travels for the book is that you actually see more women outside in rural India than you see in our cities. So if you walk around in Bombay, and I love walking around in Bombay around the Oval Maidan and those lovely parts of South, you never see girls playing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
To that end, you still see more women. They may be agricultural laborers, but they may be out doing chores, but you still see women in. I'm not saying this is some unequivocal statement on rural India being more empowered, not at all. I'm just saying there are no spaces, right, for men and women, and the spaces that exist are either exclusive colonial clubs. You see a lot of that in Bombay, the Gymkhanas. You see a lot of that in Calcutta as well.
Sure.
And there you see mostly boys and men. But it seems to me, this is what I was part of the Bangalore Literature Festival, and they had lots of sports panels. This is what Simon Cooper, who writes on football for the Financial Times, and Gideon Hay, the Australian cricket writer, said that, how does India have any kind of sports culture? They were saying this about Bangalore, which still has green spaces. How do people, don't people feel like going out and just having a day in the park? And you can't even run on the streets because everything is broken, because metro construction is taking place all over India for 2024 election.
Yeah. Well, I'm renowned for my lack of athleticism, so I will just say that you won't be able to pay me enough to run in the heat.
But you would want to walk, right? I mean, forget running. I mean, I'm just saying.
No, the space issue is key.
Huge. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so many important points you've raised. Thank you so much today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for a great conversation, Sohini.
Yeah.
We'll be back on The Wire next week with another question, another exciting guest, and more conversation.